Ready? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Parenting Preteen event. We're so glad you're here. We are being live streamed and recorded, so if you hear or see information tonight that you want to go back and talk about or share with a friend, we'll make sure on our school district website we'll be able to get to those things. My name is Tricia Smith. I am the Assistant Superintendent of the Chehalis School District, and thank you again for attending tonight. The idea of this event developed only a few weeks ago, and we are pleased to share this very important information with you tonight. I am now in my 33rd year in education, and I have spent most of my many years as a teacher and principal serving students in the preteen years. Like others here tonight, we did not foresee that we would ever need to share this level of mature content with parents of preteens. However, preteen students are faced with many pressures at an early age, and socializing has become increasingly difficult for our students in this post-pandemic world. It is more important than ever that the students that have constant, caring adults and positive role models engaged in their lives will be more successful. And that's why you're here. Thank you. Also, if you're tuning in on our live stream, welcome to Orange Smith Elementary. I forgot to welcome our people who are streaming. In a minute, I'll introduce our panel of community leaders that I have up front. But before I do that, I want to introduce a few others in the room. Our school district superintendent, Dr. Christine Maloney, is here. If you could give a wave. We have school administrators in the room, Mrs. Rachel Dorsey, Mr. Jonathan Fox from Orange Smith, Mr. Chris Simpson, and Mrs. Heidi Fagerness from CMS, Chehalis Middle School. We have school mental health counselors with us. I've seen JC, she was out in the outer area, and a few others we're expecting. And I believe I see some other school staff. Is there other school staff that's present here today? Little waves, thank you. A teacher and office. We have PTA members who partnered with us on this event, providing cookies, the owl for streaming, and their other support such as cookies tonight. So counting up, I think we all get like 2 or 3 cookies tonight before we leave. So if you want a water or cookie while we're talking, don't hesitate to get up and grab it. Tonight on our panel, we have brought in folks from our community. We were expecting Misty Shogreen. She is our True North Assistant Program person. She shares the services of True North and current concerns with vaping, tobacco, and marijuana and alcohol, but she's not here. Her child's sick, and family's always first. So our Todd Gorberg, our security officer at Chehalis School District, will be filling in for her, as well as having the duty of holding our Q&A at the end. Gabe Stachauer, Department of Homeland Security, Social Media Influences and Risks, will be presenting tonight, and also a parent of Orrin Smith and CMS, I think. Orrin's 3 schools, right? 3 schools, Orrin Smith, CMS, and WFLS students in his household. And Shad Hale, Lewis County Juvenile Court, sharing appropriate social interactions and understanding harassment, bullying, and intimidation. So thrilled to be up here with this group. Shad is also a parent, too, here at Orrin Smith, if I recall. And everyone's brought some team members with them as well that they'll introduce. So at this time, I would like to, At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to, I forgot to forward my slides that whole time. How long did I work on getting this set up, right? There's the group. These are our topics tonight. Misty's not here, but Todd's filling in. Todd, let me turn it over to you.
All right. I'm not Misty and probably won't be as educational as Misty, but I do work with her very closely in our school district. So I recognize a lot of people out in the crowd. If you don't know me, I'm Todd Thornburg. Graduated from WFLS in 1983, so I got a connection in this community. Grew up here, spent 26 years in the State Patrol, retired and started in the school district as a security safety officer in 2016. So it's, I think this is my 7th school year. So I'm very accustomed to what goes on, work very closely with kids, the staff and administration. I love my job. It's gotten really busy the last year. Busy enough where we're going to bring on another security safety officer. It's actually my brother who is sitting in the back. He's retired from Chehalis PD, graduated in 1985 from WFLS, worked with Chehalis PD. So that's going to be definitely a benefit that I know that's going to be very positive and rewarding for this school district to have one of us dedicated at the high school and one of us dedicated at the K-8 campus. And our goal is to rotate every other week so we get to work with the same students and staff all year long. So now, that's enough about that. Let's get to True North. You want me to stand for it? Yeah. Are you going to click the slides?
Yep. When you tell me to click, I'll click. Or when I see you change yours, I'll click.
All right, so I'm not sure exactly when True North became an asset to us in the schools, but I do know that we brought Misty into our school district about 3 years ago. Misty is a True North counselor, drug and alcohol treatment. You see some of the things that True North and Misty has brought to the school. One of these here that's really important is, actually they're all really important, but she does a really good job of helping students become successful, overcome some problems, and she's a really good asset for us to educate us on drugs, alcohol, vaping, common trends, what kids are experiencing, why they're doing what they're doing. So it's a very good asset for us to have her in our building. She's at the high school probably 2 or 3 days a week, and she also comes to the middle school. So True North, part of ESD 113. Not just comes in our schools, but they also can connect students and families with other resources. They'll refer students, help families for those services, and really promote student safety and success. can tell you that one nice thing that I share with students that are referred to Misty and actually sit down and work with her is that it's a confidential meeting with them. So when Misty communicates or talks with those students, we don't know what they talk about, which is really important to build trust with those kids. And they go back to Misty and build that really positive relationship. And we see that just about every kid or every student that gets to work with Misty. Very seldom hear anything negative on their interactions and their progress. So I know she does individual meetings with students. She also has group meetings, middle schools and high school. I do know that the kids like their groups, that they get together. Typically, I'll give you an idea of how we utilize Misty. Vaping, over the last several years, it's gotten very popular with our kids, 4th, 5th grade on up. In my opinion, it's become a problem. Very accessible for kids to get vapes, dab pens, whatever. So when we get a student in possession, or we get information a student is vaping, or maybe using some dab pens, some marijuana, we just email Misty. Typically, it'll be an administrator of that building, or myself will email Misty, just the name. And then Misty handles the rest of it. She'll contact the student at school, pull them out of class, and then sit down and do the assessment, talk to them, and then determine whether or not there's more meetings between them, or that it's over after one meeting. The only time she'll communicate back to us if there's a safety issue with a student or a family. Other than that, it's highly confidential, does a great job. Great resource in our buildings. Well, I guess we'll go to questions later.
Questions are later.
I'm going to hand this over to somebody that I text often about questions regarding drugs and other social media problems that might arise in our schools. A very good resource for me. This is Gabe Sadwire.
So, hello. Is it on?
Yeah, good.
Hello, sorry. I don't use microphones very often. I'm 2 years away from presenting this slideshow, so it's been a while, so it's going to take me a little bit to get through this. But my name is Gabe Sadger. I'm a Special Agent for Homeland Security Investigations. I've worked for Homeland Security since 2006, so I've about 16 years of being a special agent. My job primarily consists, since 2014, of child exploitation investigations. So any victimization of children, and if it involves digital media, our agency is the lead investigator basically for the entire nation. If you added up all the investigations of child exploitation that the federal government does, our agency does more than the rest put together. So a lot of people don't know that Homeland Security does this, but we try to get out and educate people and let them know that we do this. So what we want you to know about child exploitation, really the main thing is that it happens. It seems to be something that nobody wants to talk about. That's typically what I see. We all know that it's there, but it's a really sensitive subject, and it's really hard for people to talk about it. And that's one of the things that we want to get out and make sure that people know that it's there, and especially now with these kids having phones and cameras at such a young age, it's very important. Some of these stats up here, and I have this stat or this page up here that I was hoping to hand out, which I forgot to.
It's on the table or not?
But it's on the table out there. Some of these stats up here, I'll read them since you don't have them in front of you. But 1 in 6 youth surveyed, aged 9 to 17, have shared nude images. So 1 in 6. So if we counted the parents who are in here, the stats say that probably 2 of your children have sent a nude picture without you guys knowing it right now, right? Like none of us want to hear that, but that's what the stats are showing. I can tell you just from personal experience, this is third through fifth grade here. That number is going to be lower, obviously, right? Like, because we have 17-year-olds in there, that's really when it starts to take off. But I can tell you, oh, I'm sorry. Stop the press here. I have Mike Moore, Detective Mike Moore with the Lewis County Sheriff's Department. I was supposed to introduce him as well. He's here for the question and answer as well. But I work these cases with Detective Moore. So like right now, we have a case that involves a 10-year-old. So it is happening. These are happening to, third through fifth graders for sure. The number one way these kids are victimized are through this sextortion. If you look down there in that corner. So sextortion is where they have some interaction with someone, which which I'll talk about here in a minute, with a perpetrator who will make them think that they're someone else. They get them to do something wrong. It doesn't have to be a nude photo. It's just they do something wrong. They say something wrong. They talk about something. They use words that they shouldn't use. And then that perpetrator basically says, you will do this, or I'm telling your parents. Or you will do this, or I'm gonna send what you sent me to all your friends. And that's the hook that they get into. And so then they feel like they have nowhere to go, and then it just perpetrates from there. Oops. I didn't need to do that. How do I go back? There we go. So here's the scary number. The very bottom number there where it says 13% reported. So I don't have any numbers to prove this. I'm just telling you what my experience of going on 11 years of doing these cases. In the state of Washington, we might have 150 investigators doing these cases that are like dedicated to doing child exploitation cases. If we tripled that number, we might be able to keep up with the leads that we have. So if we had 300 investigators, the leads that are coming in through NetMec, the leads that you guys are sending us through the Sheriff's Department, the leads that the school resource officers are sending us, if we had 3 times as many investigators, we might be able to keep up. And that's only 13% of the actual crimes that are occurring. So when you start doing the math and you start really thinking about that, this is a ginormous problem that we should probably start talking about. So this right here, our agency doesn't do a lot of cyberbullying. We're going to talk about that later. But the online enticement, the sexting, the privacy and inappropriate contact, like that's our bread and butter when it comes to these types of investigations. And so who are the victims? When I first came into this job, I think we all have a sense of, well, it's not going to happen to me. Like, I'm a good parent. I know what my kids are doing. Or it only happens to those kids over there, the ones who maybe don't have a lot of money or somehow are disenfranchised. That is not the case at all. I can tell you through experience that this is 100% spread out between our entire school. It doesn't matter if you're the most popular kid or if you're the least popular kid. It does not matter if you're the richest or the poorest, have the best parents or the worst parents. There is no delineation between who is a victim of these and who gets caught up into this. And then it talks about why that happens. And because kids are kids, right? One of the things I think that it gets pushed out there is that if this kid did this, he must be a bad kid. It's absolutely false. Very rarely have I done an investigation where I've went in and thought, well, that kid, he earned that. That's not true. These kids are good kids, but they're inherently trusting. They're curious, right? Like their hormones are going crazy. It's just like a perfect storm in their life, and then we've handed this platform to them with no training whatsoever, and allows them to talk to people on different continents. So it's a problem that we've kind of created by being so lenient with the devices that we give our children with no training whatsoever, and we just assume that they're going to have the same filters that we have, the same boundaries that we have, and it's just it's not true. So who are the offenders? I think. Oh no, it's in another slide. I'm sorry. I have arrested probably every profession you can think of when it comes to either viewing or distributing child pornography. I have arrested cops. I have arrested teachers. I have arrested, you name it. We've done it. I've done hundreds of these investigations, and it is you would not believe some of the people that we've arrested for child pornography. It's not the people, we have this preconceived notion of who we're looking for when it comes to like who's a sex offender and who's not. You can throw all that in the trash because it's everyone. Male and females. I think if you watch the news, that's the female side of it. We've been seeing a lot more of that. It's just been more prevalent. So people have access to children, obviously, but do you need access to children if you have a phone? Like, it's just as easy to victimize someone with a phone as it is in person. In fact, most of the time it's easier for these people to use their phone to victimize people. Priests, ministers, volunteers, doctors, coaches, teachers, engineers. Homeland Security made this so they didn't put cops up there, but they're just being homers. But cops absolutely have been arrested for this. In a different life, before I did this job, I was a parole officer and I had a whole sex offender caseload. So I only managed sex offenders. I basically went to their homes, made sure they were in treatment, made sure they were following all their court obligations. At that time, I had 4 former police officers on my caseload. One of them was the former elected sheriff of Pierce County. So, it happens to everyone. So, this is an image here. I have it again. I'm sorry. So this just kind of shows when these kids are online, they think, they see this girl, this little avatar up here, and go, oh, I bet you she looks like this here in the bottom left. This is my girl here. This is in their mind. This is who they're talking to. And on the right, that's the creeper who they're really talking to. I would be a rich man if I had a nickel for every case that I did where the child victims thought that they were talking to a female peer-aged, so, like a 13-year-old female, and what they were really doing was talking to some 50-year-old curmudgeon in the basement who lived in Australia. I mean, it happens so much. It's almost hard for me to articulate to you the amount of leads for those types of cases that come in. So they want Homeland Security wants me to talk about some of the things that you can do as family members. Believe children, Be a trusted authority figure. Understand that re-victimization happens when images have been uploaded online. So if your child is unfortunately a victim of this, we take your pictures, and Detective Moore will take your pictures, and we send that image or those videos to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's over in DC. What they do is they have a repository of every child exploitation image or video that law enforcement has came across over the last 15 or 20 years. That repository is well over 12 million images and videos. I think we're up now into the 15s of millions of images and videos. The victim at that point gets assigned basically like a case number, and if the victim wants, every time that picture or video has been shared and caught by law enforcement, they will notify the victim and say, your image was viewed in Delaware. Most victims don't want that, because what happens is once your picture or once your video gets out there, it gets shared so often, and law enforcement catches so many of them that your email box just fills up with notifications, because hundreds and hundreds of times a year, you'll get those emails saying someone else viewed you being victimized. I can tell you from personal experience, there are victims in these schools, in our Chehalis School District, just like there's victims in Napavine and Adna. We are constantly working these cases. This is not something that's offshore in a different county or anything like that. Train your staff and parents and children on how to keep kids safer online. I'll have some resources here in a minute. But now I'll talk to you. Homeland Security is not going to tell you what you should do with your kids. That's yours. But my wife says I have a position on everything, and I've never been wrong before in my life. So I'm just going to tell you, when it comes to your kids and phones, you better know what's going on. Those are your phones. They don't pay the bill. You pay the bill. That's your phone. If you think that bad things are not going to happen on that phone, you're wrong. Because your kid doesn't have to initiate it. That's what kind of gets flipped. Like I have really good kids, right? Of course, everyone does, right? We all think we have really good kids. But my kid could easily be manipulated, easily. And we'll talk later about some of these platforms that this can happen on, but they'll reach out. I think actually, no, I'm sorry, can you go back one? They will reach out to you, they will reach out to the kids without the kids asking to talk to them. So they'll look on Snapchat or they'll be on a game, and the offender will find them and start that dialogue with them. So your kid's doing nothing wrong. Your kid's just playing a little game, Clash Royale, Clash of Clans, whatever they're playing now on their phone. Well, if you hit one little tab over, those kids can have a chat session. And in that chat session, you may not be able to send pictures, you may not be able to send videos, you can't post links, but you can say, hey, do you have this app on your phone? You should put Snapchat on your phone. And you should give me what your username is. And then what happens is they're off platform now. Now they're on some application that you don't even know. And now they're on Snapchat, right? Everyone's heard of Snapchat. It's cute, you got all those pictures. It's a fantastic app, right? Except for I work more cases off Snapchat than probably any other application, if you put them all the other ones put together. And what else is on Snapchat? Geolocation, right? So once they're talking to this kid and they're friends with them, guess who knows where your kid lives? Exactly. They know exactly where your kid lives. So you guys see how that kind of progressed from a game, chat room, to off platform, to now I know who you are, where you live, everything. So now, a 9-year-old kid, all I have to do is threaten you. You're gonna do this, or I'm gonna come over and do X. A lot of kids are willing to do something that they think is small to keep from something really bad happening. And that's how fast it goes. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay, no. Okay, so the other form that I have for you guys just has some. Oh, I think we're good, Heidi. I'm almost done here. This is just. You guys can pick it up, but in the bottom it has my contact information. It gives you some resources. So the Homeland Security has a project called iGuardian. You guys can go. The information is at the bottom of it, and it has a hyperlink, or I guess you're not going to use the hyperlink, but it has a URL that you can go to, and it actually gives you, because this is like really hard to talk about. It's hard to talk about this kind of stuff to your kids. It gives you ways to talk, words that you can use that maybe aren't as explicit. It just kind of gives you like a go-by of how to articulate some of this stuff to your kids. But hopefully you'll actually have these talks with them. The other thing that we have here is our tip line. My recommendation to local residents here in Chehalis is that you call the sheriff's office. You guys are very, very, very lucky to have law enforcement here that still is very proactive. I can assure you that if you put one of these tips in to Lewis County Sheriff's Department or Chehalis PD, they will act. And I know they will act because Detective Moore here, whenever he gets one of these leads in, typically I'm one of his first calls. One of the other things that I do is digital forensics. So I'm the guy who goes into the phones or into the computers and actually extracts all the data out and makes it available to him so he can finish his cases. So you guys are very, very fortunate to have such a quality law enforcement team here that's willing to do it. But if you feel like you can't call, you can always report any of these to us, and then because this is my area, I'll be the one to get that tip. And then on this piece of paper, you guys will have my email address and my phone number, and I'm literally available 24/7 if anyone ever had anything that they needed to discuss when it comes to something like this. So, I think that's it.
All right, good evening. Let me first start by saying that I am really appreciative of the Chehalis School District for putting this event on, and also for all of you who are here in the room today. I think that as I talk here, you're going to see that some of the most important things in a kid's life are the involvement of positive pro-social adults. And you being here today is one huge step demonstrating that. And so let me start by saying that I appreciate that so very, very much. My name is Shad Hale. I'm the Juvenile Court Administrator here in Lewis County, which means that I oversee the Probation Department, the Lewis County Detention Facility, and also our Guardian Ad Litem program. A lot of times we are confused with Green Hill. We are not Green Hill. We're an entirely separate institution. And before I move on, I want to introduce a few of our staff who are also here tonight. So we have Lee Montgomery on the left. Lee is a probation officer. Next, we have Vanessa Conwell. She's our detention manager. She oversees the detention facility. And we have Ricky Anders, who is the probation manager and oversees the probation department. So a big thanks to them for being here as well. Let me start by saying this. Parenting is hard. Parenting is really, really hard. And I think by the fact that you're here today, you probably know that already. And one of the things that I think is important to recognize as we move forward with this is that what our kids are experiencing today, the things that they are going through, are things we could not have even imagined when most of us in this room were growing up. The things that I see on a daily basis, that our department sees, we talk about this often in terms of we could not fathom that these kinds of challenges, what we're talking about here today, are things that our kids in this age class would be going through. And the important thing, the candid truth, is that they are. And as much as some of us in this room may want to think those things don't happen, they're not happening. Some of the things I'm going to talk about, my kid would never do that. My kid would never be involved in that, or that wouldn't happen to them. The sad truth is these things do happen. And so as we talk about kind of what I'm going to go through today, we're going to talk a little bit about what's actually going on around bullying, harassment, intimidation, those kinds of things, cyberbullying. And we're also going to, I'm not just going to leave you hanging, we're also going to talk about what are some specific things that you as parents can do, not based on my opinion, but based on what the research that's been done actually says these things work and these things don't. So I've been told that the most important thing when you have a PowerPoint presentation is to start with a slide that has a whole lot of tiny words on it and a whole lot of legal language. All right, and so I'm going to read every one of these word by word for you. I'm just kidding on that. I'm going to kind of summarize some of this. So it's important to recognize one of the challenges as we kind of break into this conversation around bullying is that when you talk to the American Psychological Association, when you talk to the U.S. Department of Education, when you look at the statutes in the state of Washington, they all have different definitions based on what is bullying, harassment, and intimidation. So for example, here we have under statute 28A, this is a school-related statute. This is not, there's also another statute we'll talk about later that talks about harassment again under a whole different definition. So one of the things I wanted to kind of hit for folks is that as we look at some of the research later on, we're going to talk about the research definition versus some of the statutory definitions. And I'm going to try to liven that up as much as I can because frankly statutory definitions aren't real fun. So one of the things I just want to hit on here is when we talk about the school definition under this particular statute, we're talking about, there's three key things that are in there related to what kind of actions take place that constitute bullying, harassment, and intimidation. Those things are that it actually results in physical harm to a student or damage to a student's property. It uses the word substantially in terms of it substantially interferes with students' education, and is so persistent and pervasive that it actually disrupts the educational environment. And so one of the things, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the school definition, but I want you to be aware that all these different definitions are out there. What I really want to talk about is the research definitions, because the research is where we're going to get the information for what we actually need to know as parents and teachers and others that work with young people. Now, again, when I went through probably more than a dozen studies, every one of them starts with a disclaimer that we are using a different definition here than other studies. So this is basically the most common definition that I found in the research. And some of that research, it always has these same key components. And so what I want you to understand about when we're talking about bullying, we're talking about really three key things. It's intentional, it's repeated, and there is some sort of power balance involved. One key I also want you to understand about this is that a lot of times bullying is used as this synonymous word that means every type of aggression that happens with kids, where one kid is victimized by another. And that's simply not the case. So all bullying is a type of aggression, but not all aggression is bullying. Okay? So one of the key things also here is that when we go through this research that I'm about to go through, this is the definition that they're using. Okay? So I'm going to dive into really one of the first questions we want to ask, and this is where there's going to be some candid information for you. Why is it? What does the research actually say? Why are kids bullying other kids? Where is that coming from? What starts that? What's the impetus behind it? Well, one of the first reasons that we find is that kids bully because they've been bullied. Now, this stat is actually, I was shocked when I found this, and this is an actual study. This is actually a meta-analysis of multiple pieces of data. And we know that 89% of the tweens, and by the way, tweens, we're talking about kids in some studies 9 to 12, some are 8 to 12. But 89% of those kids who are bullying others at school have also been bullied at school themselves. When we look at cyberbullying, 85% of the tweens who are bullying people have also been bullied or cyberbullied. Now, one thing that I want to hit on here, this study that this research, this is not teenagers. There'll be some spots later where I talk about the older age group. I'm talking about your kids in this school. That's, I think, a really important distinction to draw. There's whole separate bodies of research around the older group. So this is just, these findings are just the kids in this age group that we're talking about. Other things that I want to hit on here, and you can obviously read these bullet points for yourself, what the data says are the #1 reasons, but I want to hit on a couple of them because I think there's some really interesting conclusions that, having had the benefit of reading the research, I think I finally wrapped my head around. For example, abusive or overly strict parents, that seems like a kind of a dichotomy. Why are those two things together in there? And actually, it's because there's really 5 categories of reasons, and there can be, one person can fall into multiple categories, but there's really 5 types of categories where the reason, the impetus for bullying comes from. And these and the rest of the list that's not on here fall into these 5. So we're talking about situations where somebody lacks control. All right, and so the reason that abusive and overly strict parents are the same category is not because strict parents are abusive or abusive parents are necessarily strict. It's because at this stage in development, we know that from especially this growing body of neuroscience, what is developing in the brain, this is an age group that are just starting to really form their sense of identity. They're starting to branch out, that those first few steps out and kind of making their own decisions. And when they are in these situations where maybe it's a domestic violence situation, there's abuse in the home, or they have parents that instead of having those guardrails for making sure they don't go off the cliff, they actually say, no, I'm going to drive every step of your life. And what you have is kids who start to act out in a bullying manner in order to have some situation where they have some iota of control. And so that's why that's up there. That's one of the biggest reasons that research shows is the control factor is actually one of the huge contributors to bullying. Obviously, a lot of times we have emotional regulation, things like that. Kids just don't know how to handle different situations they're in. The kids who are bullied themselves haven't learned coping skills and haven't gotten help or really been able to address that situation, and they take that same emotional pain, anger out on others. Another really common one is attention, believe it or not. A lot of times, the research has found out by actually talking, and I want to say it was over 1,500 kids they talked to find out what are some of the reasons that you are bullying. It had to do with, I don't receive attention for any of the positive things that I've done. My parents are absent, whatever it might be. I'm going to do anything I can to get attention. Now, they obviously don't articulate it in that way, but that's really how they've kind of been able to narrow that down. Lack of social skills, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, because obviously one of the things that has come out of this pandemic is we have a whole group of kids that certainly developed their electronic skills, but have really had a big gap in their social skills. And so we see that also as one of the reasons why kids bully, and then also mental health. So that's the last category, that we have a lot of kids that, for numerous different reasons related to mental health, tend to bully other kids. One example from the study is they found that kids who have been diagnosed with ADHD, they're twice as likely to bully other kids. And it's not because of the ADHD, it's because they are still learning, and this is other mental health conditions as well, but they're still learning how to navigate social stimuli, how to read social cues. It may not even be intentional in most cases. So in hitting on this a little bit, I wanted folks to understand there's a lot of different reasons that this happens, but it happens a lot. We're going to talk about that here. So for teenagers, let me start with the stat that's not up here. And this goes back to that candidness that I wanted to have. 1 in 3 of your children will bully somebody by the time they are 18. Most folks think my child would never do this. I've raised a good child. I've given them boundaries. This will not happen. The research says that actually there's a much higher percentage of kids that will bully other kids than you would think. And it's not a reflection on parenting necessarily. It's not a reflection on that child himself. It's a reflection on them either lacking one of those things we talked about before, a control issue. There's a number of different reasons, but it's much more common that a child will bully than you would think. Additionally, when we talk about this age group, 9 to 12, 80% of your teens, by the time they reach 12 years old, will have had exposure to bullying. Exposure means they fall into one of three categories. They were either the bully, they were the victim, or they were witnessing somebody else bully. Oftentimes that's referred to as the bystander. One of the things I want to also hit on here is that every year, on average, about 1 in 5 youth between the ages of 9 and 12 are bullied. Again, this can be cyberbullying, this can be physical bullying, this can be any one of these different types of bullying, but it happens on a fairly regular basis. The most important thing that I want you to hear on this is that half of the kids who are bullied will not tell you about it. The research on that, I was shocked when I saw that we have that many kids who have not brought up or brought it to an adult that this is happening to them. And again, we are talking about the actual definition of bullying, the research definition, where this is happening repeatedly, it's intentional, it's causing damage, and there's a power imbalance there. So if half of these kids are not telling you about it and you're a parent, how are you going to know that this is happening to your child? Now, I don't have a slide on this, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into the great depths of what the actual physical, mental, psychological impacts of bullying are. Suffice it to say that there are impacts in every one of those areas. You are more than twice as likely to commit suicide as a teenager if you've been bullied, for example. And again, of course, we have the statistics on how much more likely you are to bully somebody else. There's much higher rates of depression, drug use, all those things. So again, if they're not telling you, how are you going to know? Here are some clear signs. Again, these are not my signs. I didn't just pull these off some website. These are directly from the actual research on what are signs that kids and parents from these folks that are doing these studies, what are they seeing? If your child comes home with unexplained bruises, and they say, I fell off the swing, they might have fallen off the swing. If they come home every day with unexplained bruises, right, that's a real warning sign for you. If all of a sudden your child has lost whatever property they might have, and they keep losing more and more property, lost it at school, left it on the playground, whatever it might be, a huge warning sign for you. One of the other ones, and unfortunately I'm all too familiar with this, and the folks that work in our department are too familiar with this, is you'll begin to see a real decline in mental health. You'll begin to see perhaps self-harming behaviors, things like that. And oftentimes as parents, you may be left wondering what is going on here. And one of the things that I don't have up here, and it relates to bullying, but it's also a bigger topic than we can cover today, is the impact of trauma of any kind, of which bullying is one of them, but any trauma in kids' lives. We call those ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and how that relates to mental health, to eventually acting out or engaging in self-harm, those kinds of things. If you start seeing some of these, this is unfortunately there's a tendency to maybe minimize or to, I don't want to deal with that. If you start seeing these, you need to start asking questions. You need to start having open conversations with your child about what is going on. You need to be able to do that in a thoughtful and non-judgmental way, but these are real warning signs of things that are happening in your child's life that if you leave them unchecked, if these are not generally problems, and we're talking about significant things here, these are not just going to go away. So, again, going back to some candidness, what helps? What should we do as parents when we have a child who is the victim of bullying, intimidation, or harassment? I want to start here, and I'm going to go through these in depth because there's some really key components to this. When I say open communication, you don't just get that. You don't just get to walk in with your child one day and say, we're going to have open communication today. This open communication is something that you reap when you have sowed over time, over and over again, that that relationship with that child where they can at least begin to have those conversations with you. Open communication also doesn't look like all of a sudden, okay, open communication time, hey, here's what's going on. I'm getting beat up every day. It's going to be smaller things like, hey, so-and-so was really a jerk today, and it's up to you as the parent to then say, to begin to ask some of those open-ended questions. Another key component to reducing bullying or to addressing it is to actually define with your child what bullying is. I want to go back to what I said previously, which is not all aggression is bullying, right? Bullying is a very clear thing, and actually one of the things they teach in the military is this idea that the first report from the battlefield is always wrong. Well, it's this concept that whoever is there, in this case your child, who is in that situation, they're seeing a few pixels of what's going on. Their perspective on life is different. They're the ones in the situation, and so they have a few pixels of it, and your job as the parent is to take a deep breath, to thoughtfully begin to ask these open-ended questions so that you can get the rest of the pixels of what's going on in this picture here. There are times, and I'm going to be very careful of how I say this, there are times when what may be described as bullying can be situations where two kids are having drama with each other. That's not necessarily bullying. That's a whole different issue which can be addressed. There are times when, for example, if two kids are fighting over who's going down the slide first and one pushes the other one off, that's not necessarily bullying. It can be. If somebody calls your child a name or my child a name, could be bullying. It may not be. It has to do with you need to find out by asking those questions, what is the whole story here to the best of your ability. One of the things that really hurts with this is you have, actually I'm going to lump these two together, you have the ignore it response and you have the hit back response. Now I want to be very clear in kind of defining these, right? So this is not to say that you shouldn't be working with your child on how to address the situation. Again, this is right out of the research. This is not me telling you this, but it doesn't mean that you should not be working with your child on how to ignore in the moment what's happening. And neither is it about telling your child you shouldn't ever engage in any kind of self-defense. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying here is if your only response to a child who took the step to come and tell you what's happening to them is to say, well, just ignore them. Or, hey, if they hit you, hit them back. The honest truth is that's lazy parenting. That's the easier version of parenting. Parenting is hard, which means you have to have the time, to take the time to ask the questions, to engage in that open communication. So these couple of responses, which are actually the most common responses that parents give, is some brief, here's your solution. Let me move on with whatever it is I'm doing, right? The opposite of that, right, is a whole nother issue. Okay, this really is part of a dichotomy. The opposite of that is the parent that as soon as anything comes out, they explode emotionally. I'm gonna find him, who did this? And they, instead of having any rational thought, they actually display to their child, hey, when these things happen, overreact. That's the solution. It's not the solution. The other couple I'm going to hit on in terms of what actually hurts that people do on a regular basis is the victim blaming. And again, asking questions and trying to figure out what's happening. You can ask those questions in an open-ended way that is not saying, well, what did you do to start that? What did you do to cause them to do that to you? That is not the direction that you want to go. When we blame a victim, I want you to take this analogy. Let's say that we have a child abuse situation where a parent is abusing their child, right? We wouldn't ask the child, well, what did you do to cause this? Because it's not their fault and everybody deserves to be treated with respect. Similarly, with problem-solving sessions, which is another thing that is not helpful in actual bullying situations, which is we're going to bring the bully and the victim into the same room at the same time and say, we're going to work this out. And I go back to that analogy, you would not do that with a victim in a sex crime. You wouldn't bring them in with somebody who is victimizing them and say, hey, we're going to talk this out. You're actually causing more trauma by doing that. And that's clearly backed up in the research. Similarly, with a parent and a child or whoever it might be, you don't bring the child in with the parent who's abusing them and say, hey, let's talk about this. Let's solve this. This approach, the problem-solving approach, can be effective in a number of other situations where it's, for example, mutual combat type situations, mutual aggression, the drama situations, those things, but it is not effective. In fact, it's far more damaging when you have a power imbalance where somebody is a victim of somebody else. The things I want to hit on over here, setting the example. One of the most important things that you can do as a parent is setting the example in terms of how you interact, especially with this age group. So, for example, when we talk about cyberbullying here in a little bit, most of your kids are online. Many parents choose to friend their child on social media, things like that, which means they can also see what you're doing on social media. And when somebody says something you don't like on Twitter or Facebook or, Lewis County Sirens or whatever it might be, and you respond to that, guess who's seeing what actions that you're taking? The child whose brain is still developing, and they're still trying to figure out, who am I, how do I respond, and guess what is more likely to happen the next time they are on social media or have an interaction with somebody who they don't agree with? They're going to do the same thing that you do, because they are watching you and how you respond to these things. So you need to be very, very careful, especially this age group, how it is that you are setting the tone for appropriate reactions, for appropriate responses with other people. A couple more here, again on the research piece of this. This actively supporting friendships, this one is a newer one in the sense that post-pandemic, going back to what I said earlier, you have this whole group of kids who in many cases lost a lot of their friendships, or at least they were muted quite a bit. A lot of their relationships began to form online with the explosion of access to technology and the requirement to use it. And as it relates to bullying, actually having close, appropriate friendships, personal friendships with peers is one of the biggest things that you can do to either prevent bullying or to mitigate the impact of bullying. So as a parent, that can mean things like, and of course being careful in doing this, but you can organizing play dates with kids that your child may be saying is one of their friends, whether that's going to the park or the lake or the bowling alley, but actively promoting your child's engagement with other appropriate peer-aged people is one of the things that you can do as a parent to help and mitigate bullying itself and or to the effects of it when it is happening. I put this quote up here because it was in one of the summaries by one of the psychologists that I found, who said, as a parent, when you have that open communication, you're just finding out what's going on, be very thoughtful in determining what the situation is, how it's actually been playing out to the best that you can find out, and act thoughtfully. Don't just react quickly. This next part I really didn't want to talk about, frankly, because when I started researching this and kind of brushing up on my research of this, I was frankly appalled about some of the things I saw, because like all of us, even though I work in the court system and I see these things, I've seen different cases come through that kids are involved in regarding what's happening on social media and text, those things. As I began to actually understand the depth of this issue, it's one of those things, again, parenting is hard. And it's that idea of like, how are we going to navigate our children through this world where these things happen and still also not be that overly controlling parent, right? So when we talk about cyberbullying, a couple things I want to hit on. This, again, was directly from the research. This was actually research done by Dr. Hinduja and Dr. Patchen, one from the University of Florida Atlantic, one from the University of Wisconsin. They've done a number of research projects, and if you're interested in this topic, you have to look up the work they've done, because it's both cutting edge, it's recent, this is not 2010, 2005. Most of these studies are in the last few years, and they do an amazing job of breaking down the populations, what's actually happening online, in a way that actually makes sense to people like me who have a really hard time reading the actual data sets of studies. So I really appreciated that, and one of the things that they talk about is, I had no idea it was this high, but basically 90% of our kids on average, and of course this is a nationwide sample, between the ages of 9 to 12 are engaging in online media, social media, online gaming, things like that, which include the chat rooms and things like Mr. Statuary talked about earlier. 80% of them own, and I put that in quotation marks, he beat me to that. You own their phone, by the way. I want to reinforce that it's your phone if you're paying the bill. But to them, they report, I own a phone or a tablet or a laptop or a computer. And this number right here, 70% increase in harassment since the pandemic, so that's since 2018 actually. That's a compounded number. What I mean by that is from 2013 to 2018, there was a 40% increase over the prior period, and this is 70% more on top of that. So we have this exponential rise in what's happening on social media, cyberbullying, those kinds of things. And essentially, cyberbullying is the same as bullying, it's just happening online. It's happening psychologically. It's the statements where you have kids, essentially, well, it can be psychologically, it can be social, it can be rumors, all those kinds of things. And it has exploded amongst young people all the way down to age 8. Here we also see that this isn't just social media, it's not just texting. There's also in these gaming chat rooms that were mentioned earlier, it's happening there. These aren't just like games like our old NES Nintendo where you get on and you don't have a profile. These are games where you have a profile, you are an individual, and people can seek and target you on these different platforms. And what's hard about this is I'm going to take some of you back here a minute. When some of us in this room were growing up, there was Yahoo Chat. There was ICQ. Does anybody remember ICQ? A few people? Okay. And then there was MySpace, which that was the big thing, right? MySpace. And that was basically it. There was a couple other chat rooms, things like that. That was what there was then. And now, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit. Now you have, I probably couldn't even count or name a third of what's out there in terms of social media platforms for kids. In addition to that, before social media, bullying, cyberbullying, those things, they took place oftentimes at school or the playground or right after school, but kids got a reprieve when they went to their safe place, their home, where their parents were. One of the biggest changes is that now bullies can bully their victim 24/7. That phone can ping all night long. And I'm familiar and have seen situations where this happens, where literally hundreds of text messages are coming in. And kids don't have the boundaries to be able to say, I'm going to block or I'm not going to look. And they're literally being repetitively bullied over and over and over again. From the moment they go home from school until the morning, they go to school, it happens there, it happens afterwards, and this cycle can go on and on and on. So this is a really key difference when we look at also the psychological impact of bullying, is there isn't that place, right, that when we look at our hierarchy of needs, there's not really that safe place where I can escape from this. So we're going to talk briefly, and I know my time is running short here, about what are some of the strategies that the experts and the research, psychologists, APA, other folks have said, what as parents should you do about this? So I'm not here today to give you a position on whether or not you should allow your child to have a phone, at what age. One of the cool things about our country is we have the freedom as parents to know our own child, to figure out how to navigate those things. But what I am going to say is, if you do choose to allow your have a child a phone and to engage in these different social media platforms and gaming and things like that, here are the things that these groups of people that are basically studying this stuff say you should consider implementing. The first one being know your technology. Again, I go back to, I thought I knew technology because I knew what a handful of things, MySpace, Facebook, and then things started getting more obscure, and all of a sudden there's this new thing called Snapchat and everything else, right? TikTok. Know what technology is out there. Know what technology and what apps your child is on and what they do and what they're using. Probably the biggest one, the two biggest ones, if you're going to allow your child to have access to the computer or these different apps or websites, have the electronic devices in a central area of the home where you are at. They say that oftentimes these things are happening while your child has gone to the room, they've closed the door, and that's where this victimization is happening over and over again. Related to that is, at a certain time, they suggest either turn off the phones and collect them as parents, or have the docking station in the same central area of the house. But going back to the idea of a child sitting on a phone in the room with the door closed late at night, that is a very significant risk factor for the types of things that we were talking about earlier, for the cyberbullying that take place, all those different things. And one of the big ones, going back to what parents should not do, if your child does come to you, if they come to you and say, hey, we have this issue, I'm being bullied, this person sent me these pictures, this different thing happened, they strongly suggest do not immediately react by saying, okay, I'm taking away your phone to solve that problem. Because what you're actually doing is, in implementing a consequence, that's going to make them say, guess what, I'm not telling you the next time that happens, or if that happens again, or if that victimization occurs or continues. And lastly, there are 4 Ps that you should strongly consider talking with your child about. This is up to you as parents, it's up to me as a parent to figure out the age appropriateness of these, how to go about having these conversations, but they strongly suggest that we as parents, when we are having that open-ended communication with our child, try to cover these 4 things. Your privacy, which has to do with the information that you're giving out, right, and a whole bunch of other things. Predators. We've unfortunately hit a time where, again, in an age-appropriate way, our kids need to know that this is not a safe place for you to just wander around all these different websites, clicking on YouTube and TikTok and everything else, that you can end up in actual dangerous places. Pornography. If we have more time today, I would talk a little bit about what the #1 issue that we see at the juvenile court. One of the #1 contributing things to kids coming through our system is, and it's pornography. I'll give you a sneak peek for another time into that. And then pop-ups and what to do with, whether in these things obviously viruses and all this other stuff. So, I'm only going to spend a moment on this because we get asked this a lot. When is bullying of any kind become criminal? Right? There is an actual definition of criminal harassment. It's up here. One of the things that I always have to explain to folks, and I'll just touch on it briefly here, is this issue of capacity. So we have had parents, I've actually spoken with parents who call down to me in the juvenile court and say, why aren't the police arresting my child? What's going on, or not my child, my child's aggressor, what's happening with them? So even if kids in this age bracket that we're talking about meet the criteria for criminal harassment, there is a concept, or actually it's a legal concept, known as capacity, right? And so the capacity and competency, very briefly, competency is that idea that I can understand the charges against me, I can aid my own defense. Capacity is the ability to understand, to act with intent and understand that an action was actually wrong. And our state has laid out who has capacity, who does not. So no child under the age of 8 has capacity under any circumstances in terms of related to a crime, like harassment. Children under the age of 12 are presumed not to have capacity. That basically means that they are, unless or until they are actually brought to court and somebody proves they do have capacity, they cannot actually be convicted of a crime. And so oftentimes we have to explain that to parents, and I only bring it up here because it's probably one of the more common questions that I've received, is this idea of why isn't the juvenile court actively doing something in a criminal way, or law enforcement, regarding what's happening with my child. And that's one of the big reasons why. I do, however, want to hit on what does the juvenile court do, and what can we do for you as parents and this community. I'm only hitting on a couple things here. We are going to have a table out there where we are more than willing to answer questions and talk with folks. But most people think of the juvenile court as it's just juvie, and it's just people who have committed a crime or on probation. And that's actually a pretty small part of what we do. We are essentially a hub of services in this community. We have access to and knowledge of and are connected with numerous service providers that can assist with just about anything that impacts juveniles. We have an early intervention program, an empowerment program that we have just started, which is basically if you call us or contact us, reach out to us, we can help point you in the right direction and navigate whatever, the situation that you're in, provide, have a conversation with you and help connect you with, hey, these are resources that are out there that can help you. Starting next year in January, we're launching a county-wide mentorship program. One of the things I didn't hit on when we talk about all the trauma related to this, the #1 thing that the community can do is going to help a youth who's been bullied or experienced any other type of trauma is to connect them in a positive relationship with a pro-social adult. So that's a new program that will be starting in January. And then we also provide and can point in the right direction related to at-risk youth programs, truancy programs, and our connections with counselors and numerous other folks around the community. So if you have a situation as a parent, we obviously encourage you to work with the school, work with whoever it is that you're connected with, but there's also a number of resources that we have knowledge of that we are more than willing to talk with you. Your child does not have to have committed a crime or have to be on probation for us to do that. We would love to help and to serve in any way that we can. So, lastly, if you want to have all this data and all this research, plus a whole lot more, you can send me an email. My card's out there. I'm more than happy to send it to you. And you can have some wonderful nighttime reading. It may be a little bit hard to sleep though after reading, but again, it's brutally honest. So thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it, and I will turn it over.
So I think what we're going to do right now is give all of you a chance, if you have questions for Chad, Gabe, myself, or any of our administrators here, or any of their people that they brought with them, there's an opportunity for you to ask a question. We'll do the best to answer your questions. There's a few other things I was going to bring up, but if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll bring a mic to you. You're smiling like you have one.
I'll raise my hand. I do have a question for Stan. So a question for you. I have a teenage daughter and gonna be 8-year-old son. Talking to people that only have sons, the response often is, thank God I do not have a girl, because when we're talking about these issues, as if their boy is never going to be exposed to this extortion. So when it comes to gender, is there much of a difference that you guys see with the victims?
I don't know. I would hate to say that it's equal. If you look at nationally, by far, there are more male sex offenders than female sex offenders. And then you break that down, there are by far more heterosexual males that are trying to victimize females more than males. With that being said, I have worked dozens of cases where young males are the victims. And what's important to remember is it's not always these basement curmudgeons who are committing these offenses. So let's say you have a 13-year-old male son, and he has a 13-year-old female girlfriend, and they're in a consensual relationship, and mom and dad know about it. And they send inappropriate pictures to one another. Are they both victims? Absolutely they could be. What if that gets out? Who do we arrest? Do we arrest the male because the guy's always wrong? Do we arrest, do we need that 13-year-old to be registered as a sex offender the rest of his life? I mean, that's a question. I don't know. That's not up for me. Detective Moore and I, we collect the facts. We present it to a prosecutor, and the prosecutor, unfortunately, has to make those decisions. But anyone under the age of 18 who has one of these pictures of them, whether they took it themselves, whether it was extorted out of them, they are a victim. They're kids. They're stupid. They do dumb things all the time.
right? They do dumb things. We all like to think that that's not going to happen, but it does. So it's really hard to like put these things into a box and say, well, you know, males or females or kids or whatever it is. We need to remember that we're here as parents, as law enforcement. Anytime a kid is victimized, you know, we just have to kind of roll with it, however it is. But you know, there's a fine line between an offender and someone who just happens to get, like, you know, that picture. I guess I kind of went on a tangent there, but did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but generally speaking, the vast majority of the people we arrest are male. The vast majority.
I could elaborate a little bit on what I get educated by kids every day. When I came into this position, I'm not a teacher, a counselor. I mean, I was a cop for 26 years. I've been educated for the last 7 years from students. And I ask questions, I build relationships with them where they trust me, so I gain a lot of knowledge from them. Think about this. Everybody here has probably airdropped something to one phone to another, mom to dad, son, whatever. You could sit in a cafeteria at lunchtime and airdrop a picture to 100 kids in about 3 seconds. As fast as you can hit that airdrop. Kids share pictures like that fast. So one inappropriate picture can be airdropped 100 times, you know, in a minute. And how do you track that? How do you know who actually airdropped it? There's, as far as I know, unless he has the expertise to get into a phone and do that, when you airdrop stuff, you don't know where it came from, you don't know who started it, you don't know who took it. So the kids do that. I know they do it. And that I'll talk a little bit more about some digital parenting and digital world stuff, but anybody, another question?
Can I jump in just real quick?
Yeah.
Just one more thing. The way that Washington state law is, and I forgot to answer kind of my own question, and he can jump in and tell me if I'm wrong, but if you have child pornography, that is against the law. So even if it was a 13-year-old to a 13-year-old, completely consensual, if you have it, that is technically against the law. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
So depending on what county you're in, depending on who the prosecutor is, your child could technically be charged with that. And that's something that I think we as generally parents don't understand. I can tell you that most prosecutors look at the cases individually and they make that determination case by case. That's been my experience. But just having it, your kid having it, your 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old son or daughter having it, they are breaking the law and technically could be charged with possession of child pornography.
To add to that, the talk you can have with your child is these kids think that the real world and the internet, social media world are two different things. And the real world, they can grasp the consequences for what they do wrong. They don't get it when it comes to the social media, internet world. It's the same world. They have them separated. So we gotta educate them that there's consequences for what you do inappropriately online. All right, any other question?
It's for the streaming. My clunky shoes.
So, kind of talking about what you were just talking about, if your child receives something inappropriate, what would be the best protocol? Like, you just tell them to delete it, or what do you do to make sure your kid isn't going to get in trouble for receiving something?
Well, it'd be nice if I had a perfect answer for that, because unfortunately, when it comes to this, the real answer is, it depends. I think we as adults need to, so this is where it gets tricky, because like I said earlier, there's a response from Homeland Security, and then there's a response from Gabe Statuar, who's a parent just like you with kids in the school district. So it's a fine line that you have to walk when you answer questions like this. I think that as a law enforcement officer, if your kid receives child pornography, then what you need to do is report it to law enforcement, because that's a crime, and you should. If I cover my badge and tell you all to believe that I'm not a cop and I'm not a law enforcement officer and I'm just a dad here, I think that people need to use their best judgment when they get it. If you have a situation where it's a high schooler and it's consenting 16, 17-year-olds, maybe that's a conversation that you should have with the other party's parents. Maybe you guys should all get around a table and talk about why that's not okay. Maybe you should go to law enforcement. I don't know. You have to give me a set of clear facts to the situation, and I'll have an opinion on it. But generally speaking, I think you need to use your best judgment when it comes to it. Do you think that your child is victimized or a victim? Do you understand the difference between the two? Like, if you're a victim, that just means that you have that picture. She might have made, or he might have made himself a victim by taking that picture themselves and sending it around. But when you're victimized, that means it wasn't your fault. Like, you didn't put yourself in that situation. Actually, that's not the right way to say it. When you're victimized, someone is maliciously going after you. Does that make sense? So, it's a little bit different if it's a consenting situation between peers, and when it's someone who's like for sure, you give me the facts, and I'm like, that is a victim right there. So it depends, but that's one of the good things about this community is you can call the sheriff's department. You can call. You guys have my contact information. You can call me. You can lay out the set of facts for me, and I'll be able to tell you what I think at that point. And then you can make the determination of how you go forward. And I know the sheriff's department will do that with you as well.
So going back to the bullying and what Shad was talking about, having those open conversations with our kids. I have a 5th grade daughter in the school district. And more than likely they're going to report the bullying to the parents, correct? That's kind of where they're going to start talking about it, is at home. So I guess my question to the school district would be like, what does that protocol look like if we need to get the school involved? What does that partnership look like? And how do we partner with them to solve that problem?
I can do it too. If you feel like your child is being bullied and they've shared with you, we would want you to contact the school. If it's in the classroom, start with the teacher and then reach out to your administrators. That's part of what caused us to start reaching out to our community partners and have a night like this. Is our students, our 4th, 5th, and 6th graders are struggling right now with the social skills to be able to navigate that world, and there's many instances where it is turning into bullying. But yes, do reach out to the school. We'll email, phone call to your administration or your classroom teacher and initiate that. We also have a great mental health counselors in our school district as well that helps those struggles and even can give advice and guidance back to parents or help you reach outside organizations.
I'll follow up with that. One of the things that we really try to push, trying to get it into Smith-age kids, but we really push the middle school and high school, and that's have a trusted adult. And we really ask kids, whether it's a coach, a custodian, an administrator, a teacher, to have that trusted adult, somebody they could go to and tell them when there's a problem, whether it's bullying, whether it's drugs in a bathroom, whether it's somebody driving erratic in the parking lot, but somebody that they could go to. So that's a good conversation to have with your child is, who would you go to at school when there is a problem? And tell them that that's okay, that's your trusted adult while you're at school. When you're at home, it's mom and dad, but when you're at school, you need to go and report this to this trusted adult. The other thing that we do have, we have an anonymous reporting form that we've shared with middle school and high school students. It's on Hello ID. They could scan it, it goes to a questionnaire, and they could report bullying, harassment, intimidation, threats, targeted violence, and those forms that are filled out, they have an opportunity to leave their name if they want, but it can be 100% anonymous. It comes to me in a form of, I get a notification on my phone and through an email and a text. I open those up immediately, read where they're at, and it is broken down into schools. So that's something, I've got a copy of this. It's been shared on the newsletters, but also if your kids have, they've all got Chromebooks, and they have Hello ID when they open them up. Go to the apps that they got that are available, and you'll find that form there. Open up, take a look at it. You don't have to fill it out, but you can walk it through them. And as they get older, middle school, high school, that's another resource for them to report something and remain anonymous. Another question? Okay, I got a question for Gabe. I know that these apps, we see Snapchat is absolutely horrible. So if you have a kid that goes to this school, they shouldn't have Snapchat. I'm gonna tell you that right now. Get rid of it. There's a lot of stuff going on in Snapchat, but what are the apps as far as the trafficking, our young kids becoming victimized? What social media platforms are you seeing being used most often?
All of them, every single one of them. In fact, I could probably go around and ask you, like, how many parents have kids with a phone here? Okay. I'm sorry, I'll point you out. What apps do your kids use on the phone?
I don't let her have any social media apps.
What a fantastic answer.
I also
That one.
have-
The answer was, I don't let them have social media apps on the phone. You mean they can just call and maybe text you if they want? Oh, wow. Imagine that world, right? Who else? What?
My oldest has a phone.
Okay.
10th grader.
Yep.
It's a little bit above that.
Yeah, for sure.
They have the Facebook for Kids app, so they can only send me messages.
Yeah, so Facebook for kids, that one's okay. But how many play games? You know the little free games that you can play on there? I mean, who doesn't play like Minecraft and like these other ones? So this is what you look for. Any of those games normally it's like they'll be like either dots or a few lines, and you can click on it and it'll bring you like to a settings area, right? Well, typically in that settings area, there's gonna be a chat feature in there. And that chat feature is so you can talk to people who are on your team or in your clan, or it's just like this big streaming thing for whatever level you're on. It's the people who are like talking there. All you can do is chat, but I couldn't tell you how many cases that we are working and work across the nation where it started there. Just an innocent little app game that didn't. So in your scenario, what could happen? Because your kid's not in the clear, right? You give them a phone, it's a live hand grenade. Whether you dumb it all the way down or not, they can communicate with it. So as soon as they can communicate with it, it's a weapon at that point. You can dumb it down as much as you want, but they could still be victimized through it. So he could get your son's phone number or daughter's phone number from that, right? So now there's a text situation. And if you can send pictures, if you don't have a dumb phone, that's it. He can convince your son or your daughter that he's a peer-aged kid. He's a 9-year-old kid from Connecticut. And these kids are very, very easily manipulated. And in working in law enforcement, I'm sure Detective Moore would agree with me here because it's pretty universal. The most manipulative criminals that we work with are sex offenders. That is, I mean, Chad, like, it's not even close. I've worked in institutions, I've worked in prisons, I've worked wherever. There's not even a close second. So once they get in, once they get the hooks in, they just do what they do, which is manipulate their victims. So any application where you can chat or communicate with people that you don't know, that's the ones that we work cases on. And the answer is all of them.
These kids are smart. We're finding out this year how smart our 4th and 5th graders are when it comes to technology. They're way beyond us. Unless you're a tech savvy person, they are smarter than you right now as a 4th and 5th grader. I've talked with 5th graders in this building that all they need is Wi-Fi and a device. A lot of kids have second phones you might not know about. You take phones away or you don't give them a phone, well, all they need is an old phone that powers up and can connect to Wi-Fi. They could go to Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, all these apps, and lie about their age, their date of birth, and then they have a login and username and password in their own. There's calculator apps. Okay, if you follow the newsletters, I've shared that on our newsletter in this building about the calculator app. Kids can hide it, it looks like a calculator. You know, your digit, your code, it opens up to a whole nother set of apps. These kids are really smart. They know how to get around things. They've figured out how to get behind some of our iBoss security stuff. They all have Chromebooks. They could create username and logins and get onto Instagram or all these apps on the Chromebook. They've figured things out, how to defeat and get around that stuff. You think about when they were at home for a year, they had a lot of time to research and learn. You know where they learn this stuff? YouTube videos. Google what you want to learn on YouTube, and you're going to have thousands of videos teaching you how to defeat iBoss. That's how they do it. The other one is TikTok. If you got TikTok on your 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders' phones, get rid of TikTok. Get rid of YouTube. I would actually get rid of, like you did, no apps. Bad thing with some of these videos, and we've shared it with on some of our newsletters, is they just get addicted to that stuff, and it's like one video after another. And they can search and learn. And you have young kids, you know how smart they are, and you're a computer guy. These kids are extremely intelligent. Do not think that they're not. They are really smart. Any more questions? I don't know. I've got one for...
I have a question.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to send it back to you, Todd. We talked about vaping, tobacco, marijuana, alcohol, and that we're seeing it in younger and younger ages, definitely in our middle school students, and even getting words and information of hearing and seeing of it here at Smith. How are kids getting access to those materials?
Well, that was one of the questions I was actually going to ask Misty to share from her experience with our students, how they're getting this stuff. But again, I get educated from our kids, and I ask them questions. And I know Snapchat is a big problem. Kids can get stuff on Snapchat. There's students that sell stuff on Snapchat. I had a kid the other day told me, I said, well, how do you know? He says, well, you just go through stories, and when you see a big S, that means store. And then you snap that person, and they'll tell you what they have for sale. And there's no money exchange because they Venmo it or they Apple Pay it. And then they set up a location where the drop-off's going to be. It's that easy. It can be vapes, dab pens, it can be batteries. I know that a lot of our kids, and I think Chris and Heidi at the middle school can probably tell you the same thing, that they steal it from home. Parents that don't keep their stuff locked up and secured, kids are getting it at home and bringing it to school. I'm gonna say probably in middle school age kids, it might be about 80% of it is they're getting it from home, or an older brother or sister. Older kids can connect with the 18 to 21-year-olds to get stuff and then sell it at school. I know that I've had kids in the high school age contact homeless, give them a 40, say, give me a $25 throwaway dab pin, keep the change. They just hang out by these places, and that's what they'll do. I mean, you guys talk, you're dealing with juveniles, you probably have any other idea. I mean, it's out there and very easy to get.
Yeah, I would just echo that it's no challenge at all for youth to get hold of these things. And I think, Todd, you hit the nail on the head in terms of social media and electronic money transfer, platforms have just made it so simple. And I guess related to that, I think it's also important to note that there may be some parents out there that feel these things are really not that big of a concern, whether it's vaping, marijuana use, whatever it is. But the flip side of that, the world that I see, that we see, and our folks over here see, is where that road goes, right? And I think that it's really important for parents to understand that role that, as I mentioned earlier, you are really the guardrails in your kid's life, and they're gonna come up against them from time to time. But if you're not there and they go off that cliff, they end up in a whole different place where we're working with them in a different venue. And so many of those kids, when we look at the data, the research we have, we see that it really started with dabbling in drug use or trying to self-medicate and those kinds of things. And so it really is a big deal, and unfortunately it's a really easy thing through really any number of avenues for kids to go.
Any other questions regarding the vaping or anything like that?
I think it was a tennis shoe night.
Barefoot. I don't have a question. I was just going to actually add on to what Shad was saying. So every year, OSPI does what's called a Healthy Youth Survey. So the last year's survey actually came out, and I was reviewing it. I was pretty surprised because 6th grade students reported the highest use of alcohol out of every age group that was surveyed. So even out of high schoolers, 6th graders actually reported using alcohol the most. And the place that they reported that they were getting it was home. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. I think that's partly because 6th grade has that initial level of independence where parents are leaving them at home unsupervised because they don't necessarily need a babysitter at that point. And so it's just highly recommended if you do have any of those things at home, just lock them up because kids are getting it from parents. That's the primary source of all the age groups is parents. So.
Question? It's one of our high school counselors down there. We've got kids in this building and the other building.
That's okay.
Okay, Gabe, another question for you. Sorry. I think you kind of answered this already, but I'm hoping that the answer is different than what I think it is. Is there any monitoring software that parents can use to effectively see what their kids are doing on their phones, or are they just that much smarter than us?
Well, I'm just gonna tell you this, not to brag or whatever, but I'm a computer forensic agent. I have 2 nationally recognized forensic certificates. I'm considered in the courts a subject matter expert when it comes to digital media and extractions and acquisitions and then analysis afterwards. So like my job on a regular basis consists of going deep into a computer and pulling artifacts out and proving that someone did something, right? These kids are smarter than me. they have this canny ability to just get around things. There are things you can do, like, when it comes to Facebook, you can do the child Facebook stuff and it locks it down. iPhone has some programs where you can knock it down to where they're not even able to put apps on their phone unless you use your Apple ID and password to put it on there. So I mean, there's things you can do for it, but honestly, like, you can put all this effort in to do this, and what's your kid gonna do? He's gonna go get another phone, or she's gonna go get another phone. Like, I always look at those as things that make us feel better as parents. Like, I feel better to think my kid doesn't have apps on his phone. It makes me feel better that I don't let my daughter have Instagram or Facebook. It makes me feel better. I don't know if she does, because she can have another phone, right? That's where I hope that I have communicated the dangers with her enough, and that I have that open dialogue, and that she trusts me, and that we are able to have this communication where if she did do something stupid and got a phone and an Instagram and got in trouble, that she would come and tell me. And that is an uncomfortable conversation to have with your daughter as a dad. I can tell you that for sure. It is. But that's so much more important than any lockdown device that you can put on your computer or whatever. Just talk to your kids. Just talk to them. So, I'm sorry, I didn't have. There's no magic pill, I guess, is what I should say. Yeah.
I actually don't have a question, I just wanted to add something. I don't know what Chehalis has here for Prevention Coalition, but I do know Centralia has a Prevention Coalition and they give out free lock boxes. So I know, like, if medication, or some of you might vape or whatever, no judgment, that you can get a lock box to just put all your stuff in there. Like, I have one, I even put my Tylenol in there because you never know. So, and they're free. You can just contact Sarah Baumgartner, the Centralia Prevention Coalition. But like I said, I don't know if you guys have something here for Chehalis.
I've been a part of some of the coalition meetings, and so is Dr. Maloney for Lewis County, and I don't recall anyone talking about that, but that is something we can keep an eye out, and if we can find something like that for Chehalis parents, we'll be sure to put it into newsletters and information out. Great idea.
I was going to ask, I had a question for Shad. I know that you have a new program, I think maybe EPED? Did I say it wrong?
Close, EPED.
Okay. And it's maybe one of the first programs in the state of Washington in your mentoring program that you want to get going. I don't know if I'm supposed to even bring that up yet, but I've seen the list of resources that your department has for families and students. If a parent needs your assistance or wants to take advantage of those resources, I know how I can refer a student to you, but how can a parent that needs, it's like, I don't know what to do. I need help.
Yeah.
And reach out to you guys for help.
So I think that's you don't have to know really what the issue is. You don't have to necessarily know, you don't have to know anything. Call us and just tell us what might be going on, and we are more than willing to help provide those resources to you. You can call us. You can just Google Lewis County Juvenile Courts. We have cards and flyers, information in pretty much I think every school. The simplest way is just to call us and say, hey, I want to talk to somebody about what's going on and see if you can point me in the right direction. And we are more than willing to talk with anybody. You don't have to be a parent, you can be a grandparent, you can be a cousin, you can be a teacher or a school administrator. If you want to find out what possible resources are out there, we are one of the places that you can call and look at.
and voluntary services, ways for financial help, anything on that for parents?
Yeah, so when it comes to youth who are not on probation, so these types of services we're really talking about where somebody wants to call and kind of help them navigate these services. That is voluntary, so it's just something that we do. We don't get extra funding for it. It's not something that I don't have a grant for it. It's just something we do because it needs to happen, especially now in light of the pandemic. But we can't force people to call. We are just willing to help anybody who wants us to help in any capacity that we can. There are situations, and particularly when situations are left unchecked or proceed down the line, where those services no longer become voluntary, if you will, and we have compulsion powers and things like that. But what we're really talking about is far more about the relationship and the rapport that we're willing to and want to build with kids. We know that in those few situations where we have authority over kids and or situations, that's actually not nearly as effective as the relationship and the rapport that we want to build with kids, in whether we have that authority or not. And so if they're willing to work with us, we want to work with you in whatever capacity that we can.
So I can tell you, when your students get to that 12 years or older and become part of the juvenile, or under their umbrella, I can tell you how the school district works with juveniles. We typically will meet with, I worked with Lee for several years, now Jennifer Walker, another probation officer, typically meet with them every month and discuss students that are on probation, students that are at risk, maybe truancy problems, and we just collaborate and discuss how they're doing, their progress, where else can we help them, and really keep track of them and keep them on a positive path. So that happens monthly in our school district. If you guys were not familiar with that, but it's a very good resource for us to have them come to our buildings every month and talk about our kids.
If I could just extrapolate just a little bit on that as well, that's one of the big messages that we hope folks in the community really understand. There's a stereotype that we are the folks who are kind of the hammer who show up, and that's what we do, is we make things happen with kids who don't want to do certain things. And that really couldn't be further from the truth. We want to come alongside kids, even kids on probation or not. We want to build that relationship with them. We want to figure out what their strengths are, what the protective factors are, and strengthen those things. And we want to mitigate what their risk factors are. It really is about taking the youth wherever they're at, or whatever they have going on, and helping provide them the resources and the relationship and the support and everything else that they need to move to a better place in life and have that connection with a positive adult. It's unfortunate that sometimes your probation officer is the positive person who kind of becomes the mentor for you and all those things, but that's not ideally what that role looks like, but we're willing to do that as well. So it really is not what most people think of. It really is around working with them, building those strengths, addressing the underlying issues, and helping them to be successful as they move forward, and hopefully not be involved in our system anymore.
Great. I was hoping somebody was going to have a question down there.
I was too. I think at this time, why don't we kind of wrap up, and then our staff or the juvenile detention staff, our representatives from the panel would have some time to talk one-to-one with folks if they wanted to. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Okay. So as you leave tonight, check in at the tables in the commons and get your handouts, or talk to our guests and colleagues. I created a feedback sheet. It looks like this. There's pens out there. We would love if you would give us some feedback on this event. And then at the bottom, it's optional. If you have some concerns and you'd like someone from the school district to contact you, there's information there. So please take a minute, stop by the tables, meet the staff that came out to greet you tonight. Also in our audience, we have our counselors, J.C. Hinkle, Brian Adams, Libby Rakovich, and Alicia Hill that represent elementary, middle school, and high school across the district. Thank you so much for coming. I want to thank you, the community, our panel. Can we have a round of applause for our panel? Thank you for the Chehalis PTA for the cookies and the partnership on this event, and for our staff that participated tonight. We're so glad to have you here. Thank you again. Have a good evening.